This is housing. This is not a commodity. We're not talking here about cans of soup. I mean, this is vital stuff. Most other countries carefully circumscribe who can own housing in their countries and under what circumstances. So right now, if a Chinese billionaire wants to park $1 billion in America as a safe investment, they can just buy a couple thousand single-family homes and leave them empty. I mean, we have 14 million empty homes in America right now. We have 700,000 homeless people. Those numbers it shouldn't be like that.
Hello, and welcome to the Politics Girl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. So, as we sit here at the crossroads of our nation, we have to decide which way we want to go. Anyone paying attention in this country knows that we're at a precipice, that the American dream as we know it is at risk, or even more realistically, has been waning for years. And we either address it with our democracy, our votes, and our leaders that we choose within the rule of law, or we react to this crisis by abandoning those things for something new. The two presidential candidates are offering two very different versions of the American dream, what it is and who it's for. And on November 5th, 2024, we will pick one. So I thought, who better to speak with at this moment than Thom Hartman, the deep thinker and brilliant intellect, who also happens to have just written the last book in his 10-part Hidden History series entitled The American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class and How to Rescue the Future. Thom is the host of the #1 progressive talk show in America with over 7 million weekly listeners. He is a New York Times bestselling author and a prolific writer of over 30 books. A former psychotherapist and businessman, Thom is a 4-time winner of the Project Censored Award and has co-written and starred in 4 documentaries with Leonardo DiCaprio on environmentalism. His Substack, The Hartman Report, is one of the smartest and most incredible sources of information out there. And as I have said, I'm having him on today to speak about this moment in our country's history and to dig into his final book in the Hidden History series, The American Dream. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, radio personality, best-selling author, and one of my favorite and most approachable intellectuals, Thom Hartman. Welcome back, Thom.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you, and congratulations on the new book, which I believe is the completion of the Hidden History series.
I believe so. Yeah, it's the 10th one. So
yeah 10 hopefully. Books, Thom. I mean, holy moly. I wrote one book and I am exhausted. So you are a prolific writer, my friend. So listen, the Hidden History of the American Dream, which I have right here, so people can see it, The Hidden History of the American Dream, is kind of an immersion into what you call the fall of the American dream and the steps that we can be taking to bring it back. It lays out the ways in which inequality has grown and shifted over the past 50 years in America and how it's affected everything from our politics and economics to the strength of our actual democratic institutions. So what inspired you to write this book other than what we're living through?
Well, I think what we're living through is it. I'm old enough to have seen both sides of this. I was born in 1951. I grew up as the American dream was exploding, as it was growing. In fact, I was born the year that Russell Kirk published The Conservative Mind, which is the book that ultimately led to the destruction of the American middle class. And from that time until the mid-'80s, when Reaganism really started to bite, the American middle class was steadily growing. I use the definition of the middle class as basically my dad. I believe I talk about him in the book. Basically, he, in 1957, I think I was 6 years old, we had been very poor. I mean, he had been making a living selling Rexair vacuum cleaners and World Book encyclopedias door to door. And we were living in this, literally in a one-room little house that used to be a shed, a bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, living room. It was all one room. And he got this job finally at a tool and die shop where he was able to have union membership in the Machinists Union. And boom, we were in the middle class. And, the next year he bought this house, a little 3-bedroom house in South Lansing, Michigan. And from then on until the day he died, he was able to buy a new car every 2 years. He was able to take a vacation every year for a couple of weeks. He was able to retire with dignity and travel the world with a pension and Social Security. He was able to raise 4 boys and send those of us who could or wanted to college. This was Franklin Roosevelt's, freedom from want sort of thing. We weren't afraid that somebody getting sick would destroy the family. If any of us had the potential to use education to achieve our highest ability, that was there for us. I mean, so many of these things that have just been ripped away from us by the Reagan Revolution, frankly. That's what I really wanted to talk about in the book, or write about, is, we know how to create the American dream, how to create a strong American middle class. And, and like I think I mentioned, when Reagan came into office, 2/3 of us were in the middle class. Right now, it's about 43% of us. There are different people have different numbers. There's an absolute consensus it's below 50%. Some people are saying 43, some 45, and some 47%. And it all depends on your definition of the middle class.
I think that's true. It depends on your definition, because I think a lot of people would make it by the numbers and would say, I'm absolutely just getting by here.
Well, and that's the other thing is that right now, in order to maintain the same standard of living that you could in 1981 with a single paycheck, requires 2.3 paychecks. And just so, you've got two wage earner families now hitting that same level of safety and quality of life that my dad had with a single paycheck. And so really, Reaganism didn't just cut us in half, he cut us in quarters. It's just it's amazing what Reaganism has done to the American middle class. There has been a $51 trillion transfer of wealth from 1981 till this year. $51 trillion from working class people, their assets, their income, everything else, up to the top 1%. And, here we are.
Yeah, here we are. I mean, clearly the main theme of the book is this widening wealth gap, right? Particularly between the ultra rich and the rest of us. Something I think most of us can feel, especially with things like, say, home ownership, which used to be a key element of the American dream. You're talking about moving from this one-bedroom place for a one-room place to this home where you felt like you belonged and you were in the middle class. Most of us are just feeling hopelessly out of reach of housing now, right? Like, you argue in the book that housing shouldn't be treated as a commodity. Would you mind speaking a bit to that?
Yeah, historically in America, housing was kind of respected, and housing was for living in. And other countries have actually passed laws to protect housing, and I'll get to those in a second. But in 2008, when the housing market was crashing under the weight of, the combined Bush-era deregulation of the banks and, progressive deregulation, and also these all of these scam things, Trump University was one of the leaders in this, telling people, hey, if you've got enough equity in your home to borrow enough money to buy a second house and turn that into a rental property, do that, and then use that to buy a third house and do that. And I mean, that was the whole Trump University shtick. And what happened was, when the housing market went soft in 2008, all those people who had believed those sales pitches, they went bankrupt, basically. And so we ended up with all this housing on the market. And one of the big banks, and I believe it's in the book, I believe it was Goldman Sachs, it might have been one of the other banks, wrote a white paper saying, with housing so cheap right now and so distressed, I mean, Steve Mnuchin alone had kicked 30,000 people out of their homes illegally by robo-signing. With housing so cheap right now, this is a great opportunity for Wall Street. We should be buying up single-family homes and converting them to rental properties and, just making money off these things. And you get the benefit of depreciation, and you get, an appreciating asset that you can depreciate, which is, just there's all kinds of incredible benefits to this. A bunch of hedge funds and big banks jumped into this with both feet. And so now, and every year, more millions of American single-family homes are being bought up by these big banks, taken off the market for purchase as a first home, or even as a new home, and are being turned into rental properties. And the result of that is that it's tightened up the housing market tremendously. It's driving up the cost of housing. In fact, the Biden administration is looking at suing many of them right now, because they're using a shared database program to calculate how to jack rents up to the point where, in some cases, rents are doubling, over the last couple of years, to take them up to the point where, okay, we finally hit the point where the market won't sustain that any longer. It has all to do with markets and nothing to do with people and housing. And so I'm suggesting that we should say, you can, and by you, I mean any person or any corporation or bank or hedge fund or whatever, can own, say, 4 houses, 5 houses, maybe 6. If you want to do that kind of American dream thing of, like Trump was promoting, that's cool, or the bank or whatever. But beyond that, no, I'm sorry. This is housing. This is not a commodity. We're not talking here about cans of soup. I mean, this is vital stuff. And then the other thing is, most other countries carefully circumscribe who can own housing in their countries and under what circumstances. So right now, if a Chinese billionaire wants to park $1 billion in America as a safe investment, they can just buy a couple thousand single family homes and leave them empty, for that matter. I mean, we have 14 million empty homes in America right now. We have 700,000 homeless people. Those numbers are, it shouldn't be like that, right? And most of those empty homes are investment homes. So you've got wealthy people from all over the world, particularly though from China and Saudi Arabia, who own literally thousands, tens of thousands of single family homes. Some of them are under management as rental properties. Many of them are just empty. They're just an appreciating asset. So I think that we should do what most other countries do, which is to say, if you're a foreign entity and you want to buy a house in the United States, you have to live in it at least 6 months out of the year. And that's it. You can have one house. Make it a big, expensive one if you want to make it an investment, but you can have one house.
Yeah. Yeah. Canada had to stop foreign investors from buying in certain areas because they were just buying up. They were gobbling up everything. I recently did a rant actually about how annoyed I was during the VP debate for many reasons, but because JD Vance was trying to blame the lack of homeownership on illegal immigration, which is insane to me as someone who has been trying to buy a house for years. And as you said, watching the inventory get scooped up by these investment portfolios and giant corporations and foreign corporations, buying all the single family housing and then renting it back to us. Our personal rent doubled within the last couple of years to meet market value. And they're doing this everywhere in America, right? People are overpaying. They're priced out of the market. They have no choice but to become lifelong renters, right? And then the increased costs just keep going up because it's someone else's bottom line. It's someone else's investment portfolio. And I think Tim Walz put it really well at the debate that owning a home or a place to live isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's part of our identity. It's where we raise our kids. It's a place of safety and security that tells us we've somehow made it, right? Like that we belong somewhere. And it's different when you can't have that. And so many people these days can't have that and they think they never will. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And housing, I mean, we have to have food, water, housing. There's healthcare. There's some just fundamental basics. And in most all of the developed world, certainly the other 33 of the 34 OECD countries, housing and healthcare are both considered human rights. And in the United States, no, housing and healthcare are both just commodities and, subject to the whims of the marketplace. It's wrong.
It is wrong. And that's why it's like the Vance Trump ticket, and I put it in that order on purpose because I think that's the way it's going to go, says, housing is a problem, so blame the immigrants. And the Harris Walz ticket is saying, housing is a problem, let's try and fix it. Because we need to be really clear that these corporations and companies, they're not just buying single family houses in areas like mine in Los Angeles. They're buying apartment buildings, they're buying trailer parks as well. They're hitting us from both ends. And it's unsustainable and unfair because regular people can't ever hope to compete or actually belong anywhere that way.
Just this idea that immigrants are coming into your town, fresh from having, crossed the border and, in desperate poverty, and they're going to buy up all the $400,000 homes in the neighborhoods so that middle-class American families can't, is absurd on its face. I'm just astonished that when JD said that the commentators didn't break out in laughter. It's insane.
And I think that too many people believe it. And here's the thing about something like Springfield, Ohio, right? A lot of those Haitian immigrants that have been the deridement of so much terrible slander from the Trump-Vance campaign, they actually bought houses that were, empty, that no one wanted to have anything to do with. And then they fixed them up. And they've actually increased the property value of those neighborhoods. And they were living in houses no one else wanted to live in. And there's residents of Springfield, Ohio that are like, they were taking houses we didn't want. They were taking jobs that we didn't want. They've actually helped our entire neighborhood. So I think this spin that we're getting on it is so detrimental, not just to our country and our sensibilities about what we are as a nation and how kind we are and unkind we are to the stranger, but just in general, it's just straight up lies. But listen, your book isn't the #1 bestseller in income inequality for housing alone. I'm sure it won't surprise people to find out that millennials and Gen Z only hold about 4.6% of the country's wealth compared to the 22% that boomers held at the same age. And That's clearly neither right nor acceptable either. So this book is basically posing the question, what happened to the promise of the American dream? Because it's not just housing, it's so many other elements. How closely do you track your bank statements and credit card transactions? I honestly know I don't do it nearly enough. How many transactions do you think you make a month? I was shocked to learn that the average US consumer makes an average of 70 payments a month. That's why keeping track of our spending can be so overwhelming, which is where Rocket Money comes in. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that empowers you to save more, spend less, and take control of your financial life. Rocket Money makes it so much quicker and easier to stay on top of your finances. With Rocket Money, you can see all of your checking, savings, and credit cards and investments in one place, allowing you to understand your spending trends. Rocket Money can also help you set up a custom budget to identify top spending categories and suggest areas where you can adjust your spending habits. They will calculate your monthly spending allowance and alert you when you're close to going over budget. They also have a goals feature that automatically saves money for you so you don't have to even think about it. Whether your goal is to pay off your credit card debt, save money for a house, or simply save, Rocket Money makes it easy, which is probably why Rocket Money has over 5 million happy members and saves its users over $1 billion across all the app's features. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Get Rocket Money today at rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. That's rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. Well, as all the kind men on the internet constantly remind me, I am not young. And my photographs remind me that age really can change your face. But at least our amazing sponsor has my back. Look, I try not to get too hung up on aging because as someone who's sick and was told she might not make it to this age, I am very happy to be here. But I do want to keep my skin as healthy as possible as I get older. Did you know that as you age, your body starts accumulating sentient cells, also called zombie cells? These little dudes stop producing collagen and hyaluronic acid like they used to, and instead start secreting an inflammatory substance that makes not only them, but their neighboring cells dysfunctional as well. But there's an answer for this, and it comes from our friends at OneSkin. Founded by an all-woman team of scientists, OneSkin is the first and only skin longevity company to target cellular sentience, which is a key hallmark of aging, with their proprietary OS1 peptide. OS1 is scientifically proven to decrease lines and wrinkles, boost hydration, and help with the thinning skin that often comes with age. There's a reason they have over 4,000 five-star reviews for their full line of face, body, sun, and travel size products. They really are terrific. Treating symptoms rather than the root cause of aging has long been the norm. Most skincare available on the market is designed to provide a temporary reduction in visible signs of aging, addressing the surface symptoms rather than the underlying decline of skin health. OneSkin, on the other hand, believes the purpose of skincare is not just to improve how we look, but to optimize our skin's biology so that it's more resilient to the aging process. It's next-level skincare. OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. Get started today with 15% off using the code PoliticsGirl at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code PoliticsGirl. And after you purchase, they're going to ask you how you heard about them, so please support the show and tell them that we sent you. What happened to the promise of the American dream? Because it's not just housing, it's so many other elements.
It all started in 1951, in my opinion, although the idea of the American dream, the idea of, people being able to own their own home and, have that life, it's always been part of the American experience. But Franklin Roosevelt set out with John Maynard Keynes's economic policies in 1933 to build a middle class in the United States. No country had ever had more than half their population in the middle class ever. And we were the first country to do that in a big way, or at least the first substantial country. And it worked. We went from probably around 15 or 20% of us being in the middle class up to 2/3 when Reagan came into office.
And I should remind people that don't know what you know, that FDR is the president that brought in all the New Deal policies. So a lot of the things you take for granted, like unemployment insurance and how long your workday can be and right to work, all this stuff, came in under FDR's sort of New Deal policies. And that sort of changed how we looked at the American society. And then we started adjusting it again in the Reagan years. So for people that don't know.
Absolutely. So anyhow, in 1951, as we were right around the time we were approaching 50% of us being in the middle class. having the American dream. Russell Kirk wrote this book, The Conservative Mind, and the subtitle is From Burke to Eliot, and that's Edmund Burke to T.S. Eliot. And Edmund Burke was this economist, philosopher, British guy during the American Revolutionary period. And he was a strong advocate for the British maximum wage laws. At that time in England, it was illegal if you were an employer to pay your employees over a certain amount because they did not want a middle class to emerge. The middle class that is produced by normal economics, by just old-fashioned raw laissez-faire capitalism, pretty much always resembles the world that Charles Dickens wrote about. And if you think of this, the story of the Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge was actually the middle class. He had a one employee company. That's as small a business as you can own. He had this little tiny business. His partner was dead, and he had one employee. And his employee was the 95% of the people in England at that time who were in the poverty, basically. They were the working poor. And so you had about a 3% middle class at that time, which was mostly doctors, lawyers, and shop owners, small businesses. And then you had the top 1%, which is the royal family and all those buddies who controlled 90% of the assets of the country. That's what you normally get if you don't intervene in capitalism with regulations, if you don't have regulated capitalism. So FDR came along and said, we're going to do regulated capitalism, and we're going to create a middle class, which worked. So anyhow, in 1951, Russell Kirk wrote this book, and he said, if the middle class, which is growing rapidly right now, if it gets too large, and in this he's kind of citing Edmund Burke, if it gets too large, you're going to see society just break down. America is going to go to hell. It's going to be the end of the American experiment. Young people will no longer respect their elders. Women will no longer want to be in the household and raising families. And minorities will forget their place in society. And so, when the book came out in 51, Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley got all excited about it. But most people, even Republicans, thought, Kirk was a crackpot. What are you talking about? Middle class is going to destroy America. And then came the 60s. In 1961, the FDA approved the birth control pill. So by 1965, we had a really rigorous women's movement, a really solid women's movement going on, demanding, rights in the workplace, for example, and the whole so-called bra burning movement. It was also the peak of the civil rights movement leading up to the murder of Martin Luther King. And so by the mid-60s, late 1960s, we had cities on fire as minorities were demanding rights. And then also we had the Vietnam War during that period of time. And so you had young men saying, hell no, I'm not going to go, burning their draft cards. And so this was exactly what Kirk had predicted. At that point, Republicans looked around at each other, not realizing that what they were seeing was the birthing of the next evolutionary stage in America of, expanding freedom, of good. These were all good things. But, like childbirth, it's painful for a little while. It's rough. It's messy. But you get through it and things get better. But they didn't see it that way. They thought, oh, my God, Russell Kirk was right. Burke was right. And society is going to go to hell. And we're going to see the end of the American experiment. And it's going to be complete chaos. And they're going to be burning down our cities. And the women are all going to go off and run corporations. And nobody's going to have families anymore. And quack, 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 all this hysteria. So the solution in their minds, and this was the commission that was given to Ronald Reagan in 1980 when he ran for president, was we've got to reduce the size of the American middle class. It's a danger to our country. And so that's what Reagan did. He came into office, and the first thing he did is he went after unions. He busted PATCO in the first month after he was elected, as I recall. Very shortly thereafter, anyway. It was the Air Traffic Controllers Union. And it was one of only 2 or 3 unions that had endorsed him, in fact. They thought they had a deal with him, but he totally screwed them. He destroyed their union and went on this Jeremiad. And then also, they thought having young people have free access to college or inexpensive. I mean, the entire University of California system before Reagan's governorship had been free. And everywhere else, I mean, I didn't graduate from college, but when I went to college, I paid my tuition working as a dishwasher at Bob's Big Boy and pumping gas at the Esso station and being a weekend DJ.
And you used to be able to do that too.
Yeah, it was easy. And my mom in the 40s actually graduated from Michigan State, and she paid for it working as a lifeguard in Charlevoix, Michigan, and during the summers, and lifeguards don't make squat. So anyhow, the Reagan Revolution was, okay, we got to clamp down on these kids. And that's why we have $2 trillion in student debt right now, which is weighing families down and preventing families from forming, preventing people from starting small businesses, preventing them from buying houses. They wanted to go after the young people. They wanted to go after the working class people. They wanted to go after the unions. And the bottom line is that, they just gutted much of the American middle class. And then along come the demagogues, Donald Trump saying, it's a lot harder now than it used to be. Let's make America great again like it used to be. I mean, we all remember that, don't we? And who's at fault for this? It's the immigrants. It's the black people and the brown people and the Chinese people and and it's just, it's bizarre and disgusting the way that they're scapegoating the situation that they themselves created, maybe with the best of intentions, but nonetheless, they themselves created.
I don't know if you would say it's the best of intentions. I mean, the idea to hold back the middle class because you think that it's going to disrupt the society you believe is already great, when that is really just expanding rights to people, expanding civil rights, expanding women's rights, expanding workers' rights. I mean, the idea that you would hold back unions or hold back women, it's the same thing that they're doing today. And I don't think they're doing it with the best of intentions. It's all the same villainization, and it's all the same people they're trying to control, right? Which is kind of like, where are we now? Right? Like, we're exactly in the same place again, with people being like, these people have too much and we want to go back to when we had it all. I should probably tell people that your book, this book, The American Dream, The Hidden History of the American Dream, it's short, it's easy to read, yes, but it's also part of an entire series. We were talking about this being 10 books. And I want people to know that Tom wrote books on the war on voting, who stole your vote and how to get it back. He wrote a book on neoliberalism, and which is all about Reaganism and how it gutted America. Wrote a book on democracy and really just goes through the whole history of democracy. The Supreme Court, which Tom calls the betrayal of America, which we can all agree. I think if we look at the Supreme Court today, it is. He wrote an entire book on America's healthcare, which the subtitle is Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich. And I think anybody who lives in America right now knows that's going on. American oligarchy, which is called Reclaiming Our Democracy from the Ruling Class. Monopolies, which is what happened during Reaganism. How big business destroyed the American dream. An entire book on guns and the Second Amendment. And what's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America. How the deaths of privacy and the rise of surveillance threatens us and our democracy. So I feel like this book he has just written, the 10th and final book, we think, in the American Dream series, is in a lot of ways a culmination of all of those previous ideas to put a real spotlight on where we are now, which we're saying is so similar to where we were, back in the 60s, which was also a very tumultuous time.
Yeah. There's been this constant push and pull throughout American history between conservatives and progressives, basically. I mean, you can go back to the John Adams presidency when he passed the Alien Sedition Act and started arresting newspaper publishers. And his vice president, Thomas Jefferson, walked out of the White House and said, that's it, I'm never coming back. And for the last 2 years of that presidency, of the Adams presidency, those two men never met or talked to each other. And then Jefferson ran for president and beat him in the election of 1800, which Jefferson referred to as the Second American Revolution. And it really was. In fact, I wrote a book called The Revolution of 1800, which is all about that election and how it happened and why it happened. But Adams was one of those people who was very wary of what he called the rabble, the average person. And although he wasn't rich himself, he certainly wanted to be and respected the rich. And Jefferson was saying, no, this should be about the average working person, and we can't rely on the rich, and we need to tax the rich, and, et cetera, et cetera. So from then till today, we still have this dynamic going on. And the biggest problem, frankly, that I think we have right now is that 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court legalized political bribery. They basically gave license to big corporations and billionaires to own our political system. So now you've got Elon Musk appearing with Donald Trump, at his campaign rallies and pouring some $45 million a month into his campaign and starting super PACs and things.
And putting up all this stuff on his social media platform to his 200 million followers a day. That's just straight lies. And we can't stop it because he owns the platform.
That's correct. Yeah. So, in many ways, we're fighting a battle that we've always been fighting in America. It seems like there are these kind of cycles in history. I don't recall if I got into it in the American Dream book or if this was in the Oligarchy book, but Neil Howe and I'm forgetting Strauss's first name, wrote this book called The Fourth Turning, in which they suggested that basically every 80 years, there's like this massive reboot, and that there's these 4 generations that repeat themselves continuously. So you have a generation that's born during a time of crisis, during a time of war or depression. And that generation, struggles with that and comes through that, and that creates their kind of personality. And then they give birth to a generation that builds the country back up after that disaster. And then they give birth to a generation who says, oh, our parents worked their butts off, and what did they get out of that? And so I want to pursue transcendental truths, and they go on spiritual journeys and they're kind of Henry David Thoreau or the 1960s hippies generation. And then they give birth to a generation that says, our parents sat around and gazed at their navels and meditated, and that didn't get them anywhere. We're going to get rich. And then that generation goes out and tries to get rich, and in the process crashes the economy, which starts the whole cycle all over again, each generation being 20 years. And so, you go back 80 years from now, you had the Great Depression of World War II. 80 years before that, you had the Great Crash of 1857, followed by the Civil War. 80 years before that, you had the Great Crash of 1771, followed by the American Revolution. And in fact, they take it back to the late 1500s, these 80-year cycles. And within those cycles, there's another social scientist whose name is escaping me at the moment. I've read 2 of his books. And he suggests that there are actually 2 40-year cycles coming out of the crisis. For 40 years, we go liberal and we build the country. And then there's a blowback to that. The powerful wealth structures go, wait a minute, you're getting too rich, you're getting too much, you're taking too much power away from us. And there's this backlash that, in the 1920s was the Harding presidency, and the 1980s was the Reagan presidency, and we could go back, I could all the way back to John Adams, and then you have 40 years of conservative rule. And Strauss is dead now, but Howe just wrote a new book called The Fourth Turning is Here, and he suggests that we are just now entering that fourth turning period where the conservative 40-year part of the 80-year period is at its end, and we're going to enter.
Oh, thank God. I thought you were going to say at its beginning, Tom. I was Tom, don't you dare say that to me.
It
okay.
began in 81.
I was like, we better be flipping.
Yeah, and that, we're going to be entering a kind of a progressive golden age. And I frankly think he's right. I think they're both right.
I love that Smalls is sponsoring our show, not just because Smalls is a cat food with protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients that you could find in your fridge and delivered right to your door, but because paying attention to cats and the people who love them, when the right wing is being so hateful to people with cats and suggesting immigrants are eating them, it just makes me happy. Now, I might be a dog person, but I like cats and I like their distinct personalities. And like my chips, I know that cats can be picky eaters with what food they like. Sean often ends up feeding the 2 long-haired beautiful cats that live across the street, but he noticed they weren't always eating, so we suggested our neighbor try Smalls. And the cats prefer Smalls way more than their previous cat food. Smalls was started back in 2017 by a couple of guys home cooking cat food in small batches for their friends. A few years later, they have served millions of meals to cats across the US. There's a reason Cats.com rated Smalls as their best overall cat food, and owners who have switched to Smalls reported an 88% in overall health improvements in their cats. 88%! These cute kitties that live in our home are actually descended from ferocious desert cats who hunted prey for food, so they can't just have crappy kibble. They need fresh, protein-packed meals to be their best. Smalls is so confident that your cat is going to love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means they will refund it for you if your cat will not eat their food. So give your cat the gift of great food this election season. Head to smalls.com/politicsgirl and use the promo code politicsgirl at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code politicsgirl for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code politicsgirl for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without the costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber 8x8 and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/PGP. That's oracle.com/PGP. oracle.com/PGP. So I'm a real coffee head, but my husband Sean is very sensitive to caffeine and goes through a lot of phases where coffee makes him feel sick. So we were really excited to try mud water because mushrooms seem to be all the hype and mud water seems to be everyone's favorite way to take them in. Obviously, our lives are incredibly busy, so being groggy and out of it is not a possibility in our workday. But mud water is a coffee alternative that fuels your day without the crash. Made with a blend of organic functional mushrooms, mud water is designed to optimize your mental clarity and your overall well-being. With mud water, it isn't just about cutting back on caffeine, it's about making smarter choices for your health. Mud water contains lion's mane, a mushroom known for its neuroprotective properties and its ability to enhance cognitive function. Then there's reishi, which can help combat stress and is known for immune-boosting effects. Chaga, another key ingredient that's packed with antioxidants that support longevity. And finally, there's cordyceps, which has been shown to improve oxygen utilization and to boost your energy levels. Sean made his with milk, and he's even done it iced, just like he would do with his iced latte. He's been using Mudwater's original blend that contains cacao and chai and has a hot chocolate-like flavor. They even sent us a free frother, which is great because our old frother broke. So far, Sean is loving it. Clearly, there is a reason that major athletes are obsessed, and Sean is a major gym goer, so he's really noticing the difference having the energy without having any spikes. So give Mudwater a shot and save big. For a limited time, our listeners will get up to 43% off their entire order with free shipping and a free rechargeable frother when they use the code PoliticsGirl. That's up to 43% off your order with the code PoliticsGirl at mudwtr.com. After you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them, so please support our show and tell them we sent you. Whether you're prepping for a busy day at the office or just trying to keep your mind sharp, Mudwater is here to help you feel your best naturally. Start experiencing the benefits of functional mushrooms today. I've often thought that it is very interesting to watch, especially with the rise of AI and our politics being so chaotic and, the way colleges are now. There's a lot of things that computers are going to be able to do, provided we keep democracy's head above water and we can still make our own choices and we don't live in some weird authoritarian nightmare hellscape that Trump brings us, that there might be even like a resurgence of a renaissance where children study things like, poetry and philosophy again, where we have a rise in degrees in university that aren't computer science or economics because the computers can do a lot of those jobs. And I often wonder if that will happen, if we'll get more plays, more humanity back in what we learn, because the computers can do a lot of the money-making, number-crunching stuff that a lot of the kids have gone into over the past 20 years.
Those periods, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, they didn't happen by accident. And we saw the same thing in the 1950s and 60s here in the United States. They're the result of the availability of leisure time, pure and simple, and of high levels of pay. What happened, with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment was a little more complex, but with the Renaissance, what happened was the Black Death. It killed a third of Europe. And as a result of that, the price of labor shot right up through the roof. And suddenly, people who were working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks and just working themselves to the bone and completely exhausted were able to work a 40-hour week and have good pay and have a good life and have enough spare time to compose music and art and literature. And that's why you had this explosion of music and art and literature. And I would argue that we saw something very similar in the 1960s because, people like my dad could provide a safe environment for people like me, and as a teenager in the 60s, to do those things, to start a rock band or to start a small business or whatever it may be. And so, if we're going to see a revival of those things that basically don't pay, of the arts and writ large, it's going to require higher levels of pay and more leisure time. And frankly, that's where Joe Biden and Bidenomics are leading us. I mean, Reagan came up with this neoliberalism shtick And Clinton bought into it. And, George W. Bush continued it. And then Obama came along and he continued it too. I mean, Clinton and Obama both did a lot of good and they were reasonable presidents, but they were still continuing neoliberal policies. Well, Joe Biden came into office. He says, screw that. I'm not going to do neoliberalism. We're going to start raising taxes on rich people. We're going to dial back on free trade. We're going to strengthen the labor unions, and we're going to work for lowering the cost of healthcare. We're going to work to lower the cost of education. All things that basically nobody had done in 40 years. And the result is that this is probably the first time in my lifetime that the Fed raised interest rates to nosebleed levels and it didn't produce a recession. We've got this incredibly resilient economy. And if we keep going in this direction, I think we are going to see a period very much like the 60s where you're going to see a renaissance, a mini renaissance, as it were, a renewal of those arts and frankly, the useful sciences as well.
And people maybe having a little bit more leisure time to be happy and spend with their families and not just be what America has turned into, which is like this weird work thing where, we eat in our cars and, stay at our desks for 14 hours. And I don't think people are happy with that. I really, truly don't. Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting is you dig into tax policy a bit in this book, which of course is something that I don't know. I would never speak deeply to, but you talk about how it's contributed to wealth inequality in this country. And I think that it's hard to miss that, that you're talking about we had the Renaissance because people were making more money and had more leisure time. I think a lot of the time it's tax policy in this country that has really held us back. Do you want to just speak a little bit to that? Because as you said, if we continue in this Biden-Harris way, which would then become the Harris-Walz way, the tax policy would change.
Yeah. And there's kind of two layers to this. The first is that having an income tax above 50%, a top tax bracket above 50%, the experience of countries all around the world has shown. Let me back up. We do taxes for two reasons. One is to raise revenue for government, which is what most people think is the only reason for taxes. That's actually the secondary reason. The primary reason you have taxes is to alter people's behavior. And you alter behavior by having the tax itself, number one, or having exceptions to the tax for a behavior you want to encourage. For example, we allow deductions against your income tax for home mortgage interest because we want people to buy homes. So, we can use taxes to incentivize people as well. So back, again, going back to 1981, when Reagan took over and changed, just kind of flipped our system on its head, the average CEO in America only took home 30 times what the average worker took home. Today, it's 400, 500, 600 times. In some industries, it's over 1,000 times. In some industries, in banking, it can be 1,000 times or 2,000 times. And the reason why was because once your income was 30 times that of the average worker, suddenly you were paying, 90% income tax right up until the mid 60s and 74% right up to 1981. Who wants to do that? Who wants to just give your money to the government? So number one, this high tax bracket served as sort of a top on the pressure cooker. It prevented the explosion of wealth that we're seeing right now, where we've got, three families who own more wealth than the bottom half of America. In fact, specifically 3 men in America who own more wealth than the bottom half of America. Mark Zuckerberg owns 1/50th of all millennial wealth in the country. This never would have happened with a top tax rate of above 50%. So number one, I think we need to go back to that. And there's a lot of people talking about that, and it works. Number two is that most Americans don't understand the relationship between income taxes and wages. And they think that if my taxes are, and Trump plays on this, Republicans have played on this ever since Reagan. They say, oh yeah, we're going to cut taxes for everybody. Of course, the billionaires will get the biggest tax cut because they pay the most in taxes, but even average people are going to get an extra $100 a week or a year or a month or whatever. We're going to reduce everybody's taxes. Well, if you're a billionaire or if you're very wealthy, even a multimillionaire, you probably have a fair amount of control over how much you're being paid. And as a result of that, when taxes go up, your income goes down, basically. I mean, which is how we tend to think of taxes, right? My taxes went up, I take home less money. For working people, though, the circumstance is actually quite different. When taxes go up on average working people, wages go up. When taxes go down on average working people, wages go down. And the reason for this was identified by David Ricardo back in 1805, I think, in his book on labor. And he pointed out that there is a marketplace for labor. And employers know this. I mean, most working people don't realize it, although if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Say that, you're an employer and you're running a pastry shop and you're going to hire somebody to make pastries. And the going wage for making pastries in your town is, say, $40,000 a year. What you know is that after taxes, that person who's earning a $40,000 a year paycheck is actually taking home, say, $35,000 or let's say $30,000. Let's say that they're paying, just to keep round numbers. So their actual take home pay is $30,000. That's the market for labor. So now what happens is, what happens if that person gets a tax cut? And suddenly a $5,000 tax cut. So now they've gone from $30,000. They're still earning $40,000, but now instead of taking home $30,000 a year, they're taking home $35,000 a year. Well, their employer knows that they're willing to work for a take-home pay of $30,000 a year, and they also know that they can hire dozens of other people who will do that job for $30,000 a year, because that's the market for labor for a pastry chef in that particular circumstance. And so over the period of 2 or 3 or 4 years, you'll see a steady decline in the pay that is being offered for that kind of work until the take-home pay gets back to where it was. In other words, until that market for labor re-equalizes. And most Americans, does not even occur to them that this is the simple reality. But this is why when Reagan actually reduced taxes on working people for a while, wages went down. I mean, it's just not a secret. And it's why wages have continued to go down as, every Bush's tax cut, Trump's tax cut, Reagan's tax cut, all of them, they mostly reduced taxes on the billionaires, but they also reduced taxes on average working people, which caused wages to go down, not up. So beware of Republicans offering tax cuts. Taxes are for working people, taxes are irrelevant, because let's say that your taxes were raised. Let's say you're paying that pastry person $40,000 a year. They're taking home $30,000 a year, and their taxes went up to the point where now they're only taking home $25,000 a year. Well, they're not going to work for that. For $25,000 a year, you're going to have to raise their pay to $45,000 a year. So they're back to taking home $30,000 to, again, restabilize that market.
I think people will probably think that that's what's happening, that we get taxed and then we work for less and then we struggle and then things are more expensive. I mean, I think that's how people think of it. They just think that they're just allowed to get what they get and they can't get upset. You know what I mean? Because the big business owns it all.
Yeah, this is the amazing trick that the Republicans have pulled off, is causing average working people to think of themselves as if they were billionaires, to believe that their economic circumstances and the way taxes interact with them are the same as it is for billionaires. And of course, the billionaires want us to think that way.
Also, people think like, what if I am very rich one day and I don't want to have all my taxes taken away? Because if I work really hard and I become a billionaire, I don't want to be taxed at that amount of money. So I'm going to work for the billionaires now to make sure that in case I'm a billionaire in the future, which of course most of us will never be, I question if we should even have billionaires. Then, somebody said recently, and I thought it was so brilliant. They were like, when you get to $1 billion, you're taxed at 100%. So you may as well stay under it. You get like an award that says, congratulations, you won capitalism. And then you're taxed at 100% in the billion plus. And I was like, I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think that's what you're saying. When it comes to taxes, for the most part, I think people can get their heads around this idea that when America was quote unquote great, for the people that are talking about it being great, the tax rate on the ultra rich was between 75 and 90%. And now it's ludicrously low. And half the time they pay less taxes than we do because they can pay themselves nothing in income. And then they end up living off their dividends and their shares and this kind of thing. But even if it's not things like funding the IRS, even if it's not things like taxing in general, we're talking about things like not funding the IRS properly so they can't afford to go after the richest tax cheats in America. And we just leave billions of dollars a year on the table in lost revenue. And I think that is also something that the Biden administration has addressed with the IRS funding in the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Republicans tried to overturn that because they didn't want to have people go after the richest tax cheats in America. And I think these are things that regular Americans can absolutely get their heads around. Now, I don't want to go on and on about taxes because most people will lose their minds. But I think that what we can see the Biden administration is doing is trying to adjust these things that have benefited the ultra rich for so long and got us to this wealth inequality that you're book talks about, and are now trying to benefit the working class, which is why we're seeing work with unions, why we're seeing the return of American manufacturing with things like the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, these kind of things where we were behind the rest of the developed world. And we're trying to kind of come back up so that the American worker and the American middle class can thrive again.
Yeah, just a quick story about taxes, and then we can move on. I was in
You're like, I'm not moving on from taxes, Lee. Let's discuss.
It's one of my favorite topics. I was in Singapore years ago watching Bloomberg, and it was the middle of the night in the United States. And the interviewer was this young guy, and he had a German businessman on, a middle-aged German businessman who was quite wealthy. And he was interviewing him about the state of the economy and German business and all this. And he was an American, the interviewer. And at one point in the interview, he says, by the way, what tax rate do you pay? And the guy says, I think it's around 55%, something like that, 56, 57. And this kid, this young man says, "Whoa, that would destroy. I can't. How do you deal with that?" And the businessman goes, "Well, it's not a problem. I make plenty of money." And so then they change the subject, and he changes. And then after a couple of minutes, this interviewer comes back to it again and says, "Well, I still can't get my head around the taxes here." And the guy changes the subject again. And then the third time, this young guy comes back and he says, "How can you tolerate 55, 56% tax?" And the German businessman pauses for a long moment, looking at this kid and he finally says. And the kid says, "Why would you put up with tax rates like that?" And the guy said, "Because I don't want to be a rich man in a poor country." And boom, we need reasonable taxation in the United States, and we don't have it right now.
No, we don't have it right now. I think that's a wonderful quote, because honestly, that's where we are. It's like, why would you be so happy being a multi-billionaire when you watch so many other people suffer? I was reading Timothy Snyder's book on freedom recently. He contrasts this idea of negative and positive freedom, suggesting that we should focus more on freedom as the freedom to do things rather than the freedom from things. And it's this imagining of a better way to lay out our society, a way that would make us feel more free, make us more happy, make us more hopeful. And I feel like you're kind of doing the same thing. It's the idea of questioning how we could be doing things differently because what we're doing clearly isn't working, like a way where healthcare doesn't bankrupt us, a way where we can get sick or have a baby and stay home, instead of going to work, where our education is good and our tax rates are fair and we care for the environment that we have to live in, because ultimately we can't forget that climate change itself threatens our freedom and our ability to live a thriving life. But I think that these are the steps we have to take to revive the American dream. And I feel like that is what you are mostly discussing in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not rocket science. I mean, we did it from between 1932 and 1981. We did it. And then Reagan undid it. And we need to redo it. It's not rocket science. Yeah. In fact, it's not even new ideas. Much of what the New Deal was based on was written about during the American Revolution. Thomas Paine wrote a book called Agrarian Justice, in which he proposed Social Security, what we call Social Security, almost identical, and public education and things like that. And Adam Smith, whose famous book, Wealth of Nations, is most often cited, wrote an entire separate book, which is far more important, called Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he advocates basically the New Deal. I mean, that we should be educating each other. We should be providing healthcare for each other. We should be providing housing for each other. These are moral imperatives of society. This is why we organize as a society. And nobody ever quotes Adam Smith about those things, but he nailed it.
Yeah. And I think we have to remember that FDR's policies and the whole New Deal, it was all in response to what came out of the Great Depression and how much people had suffered. And it was a response to what had happened during the Gilded Age and all those people that had all of that money and the way they treated their workers and the way they sort of sat above us. It was a response to that. And I feel like that's where we are again. We have to make policies and make government respond to where we are now, which is like this wealth inequality is unsustainable. This way we treat our people is unsustainable. People deserve housing and healthcare and a better way of life where we can actually breathe and see our family and be part of the world instead of just being these little cogs in about 5 rich man's machines. That's the most important thing for us to think of, but also to be hopeful for, that is something we could have, as you said, because we have had it before. We just need to ask for it. We need to ask ourselves to vote for it. We need to ask our politicians to deliver on it. And we can't keep thinking that this is the way it's always going to be because it wasn't like this before. We broke it. We fixed it, then we broke it, then we fixed it. Now here we are. It's broken. We need to fix it again.
Yep, very well said.
I want to thank you for joining me today. I want to thank you for writing this book. In all of your hidden history books, you kind of set out solutions, what you call a roadmap, a word I also use in my own book. And in this case, a roadmap to create a more equitable and prosperous economy that's a safer and better society for all of us. So I think this book is a testament to your dedication to social justice, to economic equality, and quite frankly, to a better America, which I think you've always been talking about. So please tell people how they can buy this book, but also how they can follow your work.
The book is available in any bookstore, online, physical, bricks and mortar, whatever. It starts shipping in just a couple of days, I think, second week of October. And I write an op-ed every single day at hartmanreport.com. It's free. It's completely free. And, you can check out our radio and TV program at thom.tv.
I mean, anyone who's concerned about the future of America and democracy and restoring the American dream is going to get a lot out of your entire Hidden History series. But I feel like the American dream is a great place just to start because it kind of culminates all the ideas into one.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much. And I loved your book too, by the way.
Thank you, Tom. I think we both have similar ideas about where we could go here, right? I think there's a reason that people like us keep coming back to these same ideas because so many of the topics in your book are the same as the topics in my book because they really are the issues of our time. And we need to address them or we're going to suffer because of them.
And our solutions work.
They do. So that was the brilliant Thom Hartman, reminding us that the American dream is broken, but we can fix it. We know we can because we've done it before. That the middle class isn't a danger, it's a testament to a well-run nation. That like that German captain of industry, we need to question why anyone would want to be a rich man in a poor country. Not only is it wrong, it's unsustainable. And the idea of continuing to perpetuate our incredible wealth inequality is not only holding us back, it is hurting us. Let us work to not only pick the leaders who will move us into the next progressive era, looking out for the many, rather than those who would take us back to favor the few. But let's also encourage them to support the policies that could usher in a new renaissance, where we finally have enough that we can once again make room to dream. I want to thank Tom for joining us, and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go check out Tom's new book, and let's get serious about rescuing the future. Until next week. PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Midas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.